Welcome to the Best of Dogman Part 3. Over an hour of our most terrifying Dogman tales, followed by
Cycle of the Dogman,
a brand new story nobody has ever heard before.
Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
The Dogman is my spirit animal, is told to Peter Bernard. Read by P.Q. Ribber. Dear Scary Stories, this is the true story of how I saw what you call a dogman. I grew up in the projects in the Bronx in a Hispanic neighborhood. I'm a proud Puerto Rican, and as an adult, I'm a somewhat prominent community leader. For this reason, I'm going to have to tell this story anonymously. Although we lived in the projects, as I've mentioned, I would spend a lot of the summer upstate with my uncle, who is a brujo. That means witch, basically, or wise men, or, well, you know what I mean. So you can use your own term based on the extent of your awareness of the world. The wise man hears a different story from the fool. My uncle managed to live a life that was comfortable and modern, and yet amazingly old school and traditional in some important ways. Because I was his favorite, I would get to stay with him longer than any of my relatives, and he would teach me about his craft. He didn't want me to succeed him. He wanted me just to learn enough to understand him, and to be able to explain him to others. In spite of his wealth, he was not the most popular figure in our extended family, and all sorts of rumors swirled around about his eccentric behavior. He taught me about the history and practicality of the work he did, but he also taught me about diplomacy and the art of translating concepts between cultures and tribes. One summer, as a teen, I had just broken up with a girlfriend before visiting him, and I was finding it hard to focus. My uncle noticed how distracted I was and said I had lost contact with my spirit animal. I listened as he explained this worldview of connections between humans and various kinds of spirit beings. I wasn't sure how I felt about the story behind it, but I had been reading up on ritual and learned that sometimes rituals work on a subconscious level. Therefore, it didn't matter if I believed the idea behind it or not. It only mattered if my subconscious did, and there was no way to find that bit of information out without going through with the ritual in question. So, soon after that, I found myself sitting in the woods near my uncle's house, my back to a tree, looking at him sitting there with his back to a different tree, looking right back at me. He pulled a foot-long portable cassette player out of his backpack and laid it on the ground. It was the kind that was popular back then, made mostly of plastic. If you're too young to remember cassette players, they had one speaker and played audio. We're supposed to have some drumming on either side of us when we do this, my uncle told me, but I brought a drumming cassette with me that should work as well. He pressed play, and we waited for the leader to work its way through, and for the recording of the drummers to begin. Speaking rhythmically, my uncle was soon lecturing me that wizardry is a worldwide tradition, not particular to any of our ancestor tribes. He told me, in a hypnotic way, that in our veins flowed the blood of wizards from every part of the world. He said the blood of Native American wizards mixed with the blood of wizards from Europe, which mixed with the blood of wizards from Africa and Arabia and the East, and all the traditions, all the tribes, all the races, They all had wizards. And the wizard's tradition is the same in each, just with its own local accent. He repeated some of those points, wording them differently each time. After a while, we grounded ourselves using the tree roots and visualization. He had me close my eyes, and we went on this journey together to find my spiritual guardian animal. Uncle asked me to describe what I saw, which was a cave that led into a tunnel going off into the darkness. He said we were going to walk the tunnel, and as we did, it would light up around us as we walked along. He helped me through a maze in my mind until eventually we rounded a turn and found the mouth of the cave opening into bright daylight. Continuing outside in our mental journey, we wandered through a forest of trees but heard no animal sounds. No insects, no birds, only a gentle breeze and an occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. My uncle suddenly whispered in my ear, "Don't open your eyes." "Do you see it?" I looked around in my mind at the forest in front of me. I was about to tell him I did not see anything when I heard a noise behind me. It was the strangest thing. Low sound, almost like a humming. Was it a cricket maybe? An owl? Then, suddenly I realized what it was. It was growling. It wasn't in my mind. It was real. And it was behind me. Gasping, I stood as fast as I could and turned around, opening my eyes. There, on the other side of the tree I'd been leaning against, was a huge man covered in hair, and instead of a face, he had the head of a dog or a jackal. He was entirely black and dark brown, or the hair covering him was. He looked down at me, angry, and his breath smelled like hot death. I backed up a few steps, then tripped and fell in my uncle's lap. "You idiot!" he shouted at me in Spanish. "I told you not to open your eyes." The creature walked out from behind the tree and towered over us, looking down with disgust in his eyes. He screamed at us. Or maybe it was more of a roar or a bark, or I don't know what it was, because I never heard anything like it before. I know my ears were ringing, the same as what happened after I had seen especially loud music played live a few times. After glaring at us to make sure we got his point, the monster walked over us as we cowered on the ground and departed into the woods. I started to run the opposite way, but my uncle caught up to me and grabbed me by the back of my shirt. "Don't run," he ordered. "Walk. Walk with me, and I will help you understand what has just happened." And so, there we were, strolling along, me panicking and hyperventilating, wanting to run, and him taking his time, lighting a cigar before beginning his leisurely lecture. My uncle explained that the hombre lobo was my spirit animal, and that by foolishly opening my eyes, I had brought him into this reality. I told my uncle that I was pretty sure whatever that monster was, I had not created him, and he had been living in this reality all along. "If the hombre lobo is real in this world," he asked me sternly, "why can we not go and visit him in the zoo?" Then he told me I'm not an hombre lobo, but more of an hombre loco. This caused him to laugh for a long time. I didn't laugh at all, because the joke was on me. Uncle told me that since the Wolfman does not belong here in our world, some event soon would trigger him being returned to his own reality. He said my only concern was reincorporating his spirit into my own. To do that, my uncle taught me everything he had been told about the spirit of the hombre lobo. He told me about leadership, about cunning, about rarely losing, and knowing how to retreat when you do. He told me how to live life nobly as a wolf. He is the guide and the mentor. I must never again show fear in his presence, and I should call on him when I feel lost along the path. The wolf, my uncle informed me, is the teacher, and in this way you will teach people enough about the ways of wizards that they won't fear us any longer. None of this really made any more sense to me back then than it does to me now, but I know that when I've been lost in life, I've always followed my uncle's advice and asked the wolf what to do. I never got any formal answer, but each time I asked, I returned to life more certain than I had left it. To me, the use of the wolf as an archetype for meditation is entirely separate from the issue of what that creature was standing behind the tree, growling at me that day. I don't know that my imagination created it, since I had not been imagining a wolf or any kind of creature before witnessing it. I heard a growl, opened my eyes, and saw the man-wolf. To me, it was a completely natural or supernatural occurrence. It did not feel like a manifestation I had initiated. It felt like our ritual was interrupted by a real animal who intruded on our presence, made a clear statement that this was his turf, then ran off. To my uncle, obviously, all these different things are part of the same thing. To him, the wolf came from my mind into this reality. All I know is I've never seen the thing again. When I do my meditation, I call him by the name of Wolf, but I do not visualize him, and we don't have conversations or meet in any way. I just sort of air my grievances, then feel better. Maybe this is because the creature had nothing to do with the manifestation, no matter what my uncle used to insist. On the other hand, maybe the hombre lobo hasn't appeared to me since is just because he doesn't want to scare me. I'd like to take a moment to say that if you have a scary story you'd like to tell us here, you can write Peter at peterbernard.com, or you can call our new Scary Stories hotline number and leave it to us in the form of a voicemail message. It's easy to remember. 804-LESCARY. That's 804-LESCARY, or 804-537-2279. That's a voicemail-only number, so don't expect any of us to pick up. And now, back to the spookeriness.
The Autumn of Dogman, as told to Peter Bernard, read by Madeline Starr. When I was a little kid, my dad had a great job, and we had our own house, and I had lots of friends, and we even had a summer home in the woods that we would spend a month or even 6 weeks at each year in late July through August. We would arrange trips out by our friends from in town all through the season, and we actually only ever met 2 other people who lived in the area. They both informed us that we don't ever want to be there in the fall. Once the summer is over, you get your fannies home to the suburbs, you hear? I remember the proprietor of the only grocery store in the entire area admonishing us all with a big smile on his mouth but deadly seriousness in his eyes. Then one summer, Dad's company got sold, and he was let go. Somehow it was legal to immediately cut him off with no warning and almost nothing as a severance package. We weren't prepared for this, so my parents put our house up for sale. We all stayed at the summer home while we waited for the house to get bought by somebody. I remember going to the grocer who insisted that we could not stay any longer, and that he was closing up his shop until the springtime. We asked him if it was illegal to stay at our own home through the autumn, and he admitted it was not. We asked him if there was a risk of some sort of natural disaster out here, and he grew impatient. "Look, buy what you want, but I'm getting out of here before sundown," he growled. "And if you're smart, you'll be speeding past me as I go." That night, my sister started crying at dinner. She was sad that she would never again see the cat that we lived next door to back in the suburbs. Her life had been a Disney movie up till then. She was friends with every pet and even some of the squirrels who came by at the same time every day. This was the first time in her life that reality had intruded. Everyone was sad and stressed out, and although I didn't want to say it, I was wondering why everyone in the entire area wouldn't explain why they were so scared to be here in the autumn. There had to be a good reason for their fear. My mind puzzled over it, turning it over and over in my mind, but getting no closer to the solution. Soon, the entire family lay in bed, exhausted but too stressed out to sleep. Eventually, I could hear my sister's breathing slow. Then, a while after that, I heard my dad snoring. It relaxed me a bit hearing his snore. At least, it was something familiar. Everything about the cabin felt different now in the fall. What used to feel warm now felt cold. And what used to seem fun now seemed sad. I was finally drifting off to sleep when I heard it. A tapping. On glass. The window? My bed was against a wall to my left and at the foot of my bed. To the left of my ankles was a window. The bottom of the window met the top of my bed so that they were level with each other. From my position laying down, I couldn't see if anyone was outside the window, or if it was a tree branch tapping or what. I sat up, but realized that hadn't helped. I was going to have to move closer to the window before I could see anything. Maybe I imagined it, I reasoned to myself, and as I started to lay back down, it tapped again. And again. Okay, I sat up, and I took a deep breath, and I decided I was going to be brave. No matter what I saw, I was just going to assess the situation and then deal with it. If I expected to be surprised, it would lessen the surprise. Slowly, I leaned forward, sticking close to the wall, trying to see whatever was out there without it seeing me. I creeped inch by inch closer to the window. Then tapping continued. Now, I was as close as I could be, but still could not see anything. I had no choice but to move in front of the window, at least a little bit, in order to see out. I would allow myself to be seen as well, but I had to know what was out there. My heart was beating like a bass drum. I felt like I was going to pass out from nervousness, but I leaned forward a bit and looked out the corner of my eyes out the window. And looking back at me out of the corner of its eyes was a man with a dog head. It was mirroring my position, staring at me sideways. I could only see it from the chest up, but it seemed to have a body like a hairy man. Or a gorilla or chimp maybe, but a head like a panting dog or dark-colored coyote or wolf. It had hands, but they had either claws or very long fingernails on them. Its fangs were ridiculously huge. The way it stared wide-eyed at me sideways made it look like it was leering at me. I screamed. In return, the dog howled, then raced off, instantly disappearing into the darkness. I screamed and screamed, incapable of speaking English for a few minutes after the sighting. I know you're expecting nobody in the family to have believed my story, but to my luck, my dad had been running into my room when I screamed and had gotten a glimpse of the monster as it finished howling. We moved the beds to the center of the cabin for the rest of the night, and the next morning, we called around until Mom finally found some relatives to leave me and my sister with while they got us a safer place to stay. So my sister and I never saw Dogman again, but both my parents dealt with him about every 2 or 3 days for the next week or two they spent at the cabin. Finally, some of the family got together and lent Dad enough money to get us a new apartment and to reboot his career. It really only ended up being that one fall that we literally had the wolf at our door. To me, he represents everything that can go wrong in your life, everything bad that can possibly happen. We were lucky. For us, the autumn of the Dogman was brief and quickly over. I hope if he ever takes notice of you, that you can get away too.
Bigfoot Hunt Goes to the Dogs, as told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. My wife has been trying to get me to go camping for years. She used to go all the time before we were married, and she reminds me of this frequently. Or to be more precise, she used to go camping while hunting for Bigfoot all the time before we were married. I, on the other hand, prefer to stay in the city. Why? Simple. There are no Bigfoot here. I would tell my wife I didn't want to go camping because I never want to meet Bigfoot. She insists he's a gentle giant, but I'm pretty sure that if he exists, he's an omnivore, same as us humans. Omnivores generally tend to eat meat. Guess what humans are made of? Meat. We're filled with it. My wife said she'd spent 10 or 12 years hunting for Bigfoot and still hadn't seen him. I said it didn't matter. I knew if I went out there, he'd come for me just because I'm afraid of him. She insisted I wouldn't see a monster in the woods. I insisted I would see Bigfoot. Turns out we were both wrong. So, as you must have figured out by now, my wife eventually talked me into going camping with her. I wanted someplace close to civilization in case we needed to make a hasty retreat. She insisted she had the perfect spot, and like an idiot, I trusted her. Once we were packed into the car, which was already after 12 noon, she started driving. It seemed kind of late to get started, and I figured she had a place very close by. About 2.5 hours later, when we were still driving, I got the hint that I'd been shanghaied. Laughing, she admitted she was taking me to one of her favorite squatching locations, but I shouldn't worry because we were going there out of season. Bigfoot has a season? I asked incredulously. He does in this location at least, she answered. He's mostly seen near the berry bushes in late summer, then he or they are gone until at least the next spring. She began elaborating on her theories about where they go this time of year when a deer ran out on the road and froze right in front of us. My wife swerved and missed the huge animal, and then the car slid off the road onto the grass and only had about 20 or 30 feet to go before we smashed into the trees. Like Mario Andretti, my wife steered us back onto the highway, and we kept going as though nothing had happened. I asked her if she was all right, but while I listened for her answer, I spun around in my seat and stared out the back window, searching for the deer. It was still standing there, but now staring at us. It had immense antlers, and as I admired them, it looked like something large and black exploded out of the bushes on the left and flung itself toward the deer, who was now already gone into the forest on the right. Before I could even begin to try to understand the shape of the black figure, it, too, was gone into the bushes after its prey. Whatever it was even larger than the deer, and by its behavior, it must be a predator. "A bear," I whispered. My wife asked me what I was talking about. I told her a bear was chasing the deer. If not a bear, then a Bigfoot. But something large and very dark was the reason that deer had run out on the road. The car screeched to a halt in the middle of the road. "You're saying you might have seen a squatch back there?" she asked me, while already switching the car into reverse. I put my hand on hers to try to stop her from reversing the car. "Don't go back there," I said. "Dude, if you saw a squatch, then I want to go back there and—" "You didn't see that thing," I interrupted. "If we had hit that deer, we'd be its dinner right now. Please, let's keep driving forward, away from here." She started in with her "Bigfoot is a lovable teddy bear" speech again, and I think I began hyperventilating because she took pity on me and resumed driving away from the monster or the bear, whatever that was. "It's really not season for squatch or bear," she said, and I realized we'd been driving almost a half hour without talking. It was now much darker out, and the sun would really be down within an hour. I tried to talk her into driving back, even though she said we were nearly there. "Anyone going camping knows to get set up early in the day," I told her. "I've never even been camping, and even I know that." "Not when you're going squatching," she offered back unenthusiastically. I told her that I got the joke. She convinced me we were going camping just to trick me into going squatching. Good joke. But now that I got it, why should we go through the charade of actually going squatching? For whatever reason, there was some kind of very large, out-of-season predator around. Whether I'd seen a bear or a Bigfoot, I had seen a large predator. I urged her to start the drive back. "Here we are," she said, trying to sound cheery as she pulled the car off the road and parked on the edge of a large clearing. "Camp, sweet camp." My wife set up our tent lightning fast in the waning light. She made me carry a few things and hold stuff, but for the most part she handled it all. By the time it was fully dark, she even had a fire going and some coffee brewing. I remembered funny stories from my childhood I had never told her before, and she seemed to enjoy them enough. When I had finished, she started telling me scary campfire tales, and I admit I stopped her after the first one. "What are you scared of?" she asked me, laughing. "I was telling you a werewolf story. Werewolves aren't real." She ridiculed me cruelly for a while, asking if I was more afraid of being attacked by a werewolf or of turning into one. "Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night," she intoned solemnly, "may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright." "Stop it," I pleaded. "Look, honey," she said, staring at the trees and pointing. "What do you see?" I asked nervously. "Something in the trees?" She chuckled. "You might say that. Look, honey, the autumn moon is full and bright." I hadn't registered that it was a full moon until that moment. Then, as ridiculous as it sounds, we both heard a wolf howl. Or a dog, but it was a howl. It It sounded like a big one, whatever it was. Now we could hear dogs in all directions answering the howl. The woods were filled, it seemed, with dogs or their close relatives. That's a lot of dogs, I pointed out. Yeah, she answered, trying not to sound nervous. But they're all pretty far off, and it's not like they hunt humans anyway, she said, answering my next question. I was about to suggest we start driving back. We were camped right off the road. It would take 10 or 15 minutes to pack and put the fire out, and we could be out of there. I say I was about to suggest this because, before I could, another large, dog-sounding creature howled. This time, it was much closer. It was so loud, it literally hurt my ears and felt like a punch in the chest. I looked around for my wife, then noticed it had suddenly gotten much darker. She was putting dirt on the campfire. We were going to leave. I started trying to figure out how to dismantle the tent when my wife grabbed my arm and tugged me toward the car. Leave it, she ordered. We both scrambled for the safety of the vehicle and climbed in. I locked my door, and she locked all the doors from the driver's seat. Without buckling up, she had the car in reverse, and we were pulling backward in a curve, making a U-turn. That's when I saw it. It barreled out of the underbrush with the angriest look I had ever seen on something not human. It was taller than it could possibly be. Bigfoot, I squeaked out, and my wife gasped and stopped what she was doing to turn and see. This panicked me. No, I yelped out. No, don't slow down. Get us out of here. I watched her face as her expression changed from one of wonder to one of shock to one of horror. That, she informed me, is not Bigfoot. She floored it, and we began our rapid retreat back to civilization. After about 10 seconds, she took a deep breath, and I could see her visibly relax. She slowed the car to about 40, and I relaxed too. If my wife felt we were safe, then we probably were. I looked in the rearview mirror and strained my eyes to see if I could see what she had seen. If it wasn't Bigfoot, what was it? Then I saw it. There it was, emerging from the darkness, running. It was a large man, or it was shaped like a man, but it had long ears on top like a rabbit or a Doberman. I noticed that with every second I could see it more and more clearly. I wondered why, then realized it was gaining on us. Faster, I stuttered out. Drive faster. She didn't have to ask why. She just accelerated. The creature did not slow down. It kept pace with us for a while, then seemed to be starting to fall back a bit. So it did have its limits. What's it doing? What's it doing? What's it doing? My wife asked me in a panicked tone. It's running off into the woods, I answered, pointing to her left. I think it's over. No, it's not, she answered, and accelerated the car to its absolute maximum. The road now began to turn to the left, and at this speed we were having some trouble not flying off to the right side into the wall of trees. We screeched around that turn at a speed I literally had never traveled at before. What are you doing? I shouted over the sounds of screeching tires and the car rattling like it was about to come apart. Then I saw why my wife was doing this. She hadn't lost her mind, and the creature hadn't given up. It had just taken a shortcut. To our left, in front of us, we both saw the dogman run out of the woods and head toward the moonlit road. We could now see it clearly. It was so unfathomably big that it seemed more like a walking nightmare than any sort of natural animal. It had yellow eyes like an owl, sort of. It clearly was attempting to run directly at our car and catch us on our left side. We were driving at over 100 miles an hour, yet my wife managed one more swerve as the animal dove at us. It missed its target and slammed hard into our back left bumper, causing the back of the car to swerve to our right and the front half to swerve left. My wife and I were both screaming incoherently as she swerved back and forth, trying to stay on pavement and off of grass. If there had been any oncoming traffic at that moment, we'd have both been goners. That was when I noticed the animal, the Dogman. It was hanging on to our rear bumper and being dragged behind us at 100 miles an hour. Then I saw it lift its head, and I saw it begin to try to climb up on our trunk. Before I could say anything, my wife saw it too, and she did what I never expected her to do. She slammed on the brakes. The creature banged hard into our trunk, then let go. I don't know if you've ever been in a car going 100 miles per hour that is attempting to stop. It takes a long time. A long, long time. In fact, we were still really only in the beginning of trying to stop when I shouted, "It let go of the car!" and my wife took her foot off the brake and applied it most forcefully back on the gas pedal. I eyed the monster in the road as we drove away. It was most definitely still alive, but it was in no shape to chase us, at least not for now. This was the end of our ordeal. Now, I am back in the city, and I have remained in the city since that all happened. I work here in the city, I vacation here, and I don't want or need to go anywhere else. Is your small town famous for making something? I bet there's a shop within walking distance of my apartment that sells it. When you live in the city, you don't need to go to the country. The country comes to you at inflated prices. My wife called a special meeting of her former Bigfoot hunting group in our apartment, and we both told them the story I just told you. They seemed split on whether they believed us or not, which kind of surprised me. These people believe in Bigfoot, but were throwing shade on us because we saw Dogman? What was that all about? One of them tried to convince us that we actually saw a Sasquatch. Another argued that we must have misunderstood its behavior, since a Sasquatch would never attack people. They were all so locked into their preconceived notions that they weren't even listening to what we were telling them. That was when my wife stood up and called everyone to order. "Look," she began. "This is not open for debate." She eyed them all, one by one, and nobody challenged her, so she continued. "What we have discovered is indisputable. Sometimes when an area is out of season for Bigfoot, the territory gets taken over by an immense carnivorous predator. It gets taken over by Dogman." Take a moment to say that if you have a scary story you'd like to tell us here, you can write Peter at peterbernard.com, or you can call our new Scary Stories hotline number and leave it to us in the form of a voicemail message. It's easy to remember. 804-LESCARY. That's 804-LESCARY, or 804-537-2279. That's a voicemail-only number, so don't expect any of us to pick up. And now, back to the spookeriness.
Dogman on the Campgrounds. As told to Peter Bernard. Read by Madeline Starr. This is the story of the night I looked out of my tent and saw not one, not two, but 3 dog-headed, furry men who in turn got a good long look at me. Like every story about something weird happening to me, it occurred when I was with my best friend, who I will call Hazy for this story, to protect her anonymity. Hazy is a very rich and very weird girl. And she won't be mad if I tell you that she is a magnet for the weird. I've gone camping a million times since I was a kid, and nothing strange ever happened. The first time I went with old Hayes, though, and it's Attack of the Wolf People in 3D. Hayes' family lives every place in the United States and a few other countries too, supposedly. I've personally been with her inside 3 different country estates and half a dozen different apartments in and around Los Angeles and New York. I know they own a lot more than that too. They've been here since the Mayflower, and they're all eccentric, in that way that can only happen when your family hasn't had to work for over 10 generations. That's not to say they weren't all accomplished in one way or another. There was an unspoken expectation of genius for everyone in the bloodline, and in our Hazy it manifested in her public obsessions with fashion design and her private obsessions with the supernatural and paranormal. When I've been alone with her, I've witnessed all kinds of visitations or apparitions and seen impossible things in creatures. I can write for a month if there's any interest in those stories, but Dogman happened back before most of that other stuff. At this point, I had actually seen some ghosts around her, but I used to write it off as an optical illusion or my mind playing tricks on me, and I hadn't noticed yet that I only saw these things when I was around her. In fact, I don't know if this cryptid sighting I'm about to describe should be lumped in with the ghosts and shadow people sightings we've had or not, since I don't really understand if Dogman is a normal animal like your pet Fido. If that's all Dogman is, then this was merely a sighting of a rare creature. But the fact that it happened while I was with Hayes makes me feel in the deepest part of me that these wolf-headed men are something other. Something other than natural, something other than normal, just something other. Something other. Just something other. This was the most terrifying thing that had happened to me yet, but I'm not about to label it as bad. The only reason I ever met Hayes was that her family had some sort of internal upheaval and she ended up staying with her relatives in my neighborhood in the show business community in California. My dad is a key grip on a lot of movies and TV shows you've probably seen. Although we're not exactly rich, I got to go to school with some of the offspring of the rich and famous. Hayes was rich but not famous, and we liked the same bands. She was just beginning to get serious about designing clothes, and she used me as her model and guinea pig to experiment her insane fashion ideals on. Actually, she still does, but that's another story. I'm telling you all this for a reason. We got to be close friends, but then school ended and I got ready to go to camp. Hayes was horrified at the idea that I would be away for 3 weeks, and seemed most indignant about the fact that I'd be forced to wear matching yellow and green t-shirts and shorts every day, identical to all the other girls. "It sounds like prison," she exclaimed. "How can your parents pay someone to imprison you?" She informed me that my summer camp was a wing of the dark underforces in the world, and their evil plot was to train me to grow up to be an assembly line worker in a factory. I told Hayes that this was the last year I was going to get to go to camp, because by the next summer I'd be too old. I wanted to go, and I was looking forward to it. Hayes went through each of the stages of grief with theatricality and passion, then finally melted into acceptance. When I got back 3 weeks later, I found she had scheduled events she needed me at every day for the rest of the summer. I don't mind. It made me feel wanted and important, at least to one person. Even though she had me to herself, and our days were filled with cultural happenings and party hobnobbery, Hazy never could get over that I had chosen camp over her. "What is it about camping that so appeals to you?" she finally asked me directly. "People wear gauche clothing, live in the woods like beasts, and coexist in each other's odor. There is no aspect of it which is not absolutely repellent." Finally, it dawned on me. "You're jealous," I suggested to her, and watched her reaction closely. "I am not," she shouted back, adding, "If you'd have only invited me on your stupid camping thing, you'd have seen I would have said no, so therefore I am not jealous." She folded her arms and pouted like a character in an old Little Rascals movie from the early 20th century. "Do you want to go camping with me?" I asked playfully. She said no, so I asked again and tickled her until she said yes. I figured once she'd gone camping and seen she hated it, we could forget about her jealousy and move on from it. Although Hayes accepted my invitation that day, it was only the beginning of a long negotiation process involving her, me, and Hayes' overprotective mom. I was informed that Hazel was not allowed to go into public parks or wilderness areas. She must remain in an area owned by the family. Fortunately, as I think I already mentioned, this family literally owns several small forests, so we had a few to choose from. By the time we actually got to camp out, it was early October, and there was starting to get to be just a bit of chill in the air. Camping in autumn can be gorgeous, but it's definitely a different experience than camping in the summer. What scares me on a summer night in the forest is the overabundance of life. Will a bear wander into camp? Will a snake get into my tent? In the autumn, though, everything around you is dying. Maybe that's why when I camp in that time of year, I find the things that scare me in the dark, well, it's better not to talk about it. For all of Hayes' mom's insistence on security concerning our camping out, when we reached the estate we had chosen, we found no security at all, not even security cameras or anything. There was one person staying there, a middle-aged, pot-bellied, sleepy man who seemed friendly enough. Hayes knew him. He watched various of their houses at various times, basically as his living. The backyard was a forest that stretched on and on and on and on and so on. Unlike any of the public camping sites I had suggested we use, this land had mostly gone completely unused for generations by the owners, who had no idea what might be going on in those woods. Who knew who might be squatting on the land? Who knew how wild the forest might have become? I don't want to go all Alex Trebek on you, but what we call the woods is really a rainforest. It's a jungle. It looks pretty, but it can eat you for lunch. The wildest animal I had seen up to that point was a coyote, but I knew enough to respect the jungle. I suggested to Hayes that we camp closer to the house, as in the right outside the back window where the house sitter can see us if something terrible happens, kind of closer. At Hayes' insistence, we set up camp about 100 feet from the tree line the next morning. She had bought us matching camouflage shorts and boots outfits, and we took her dad's drone and camera with us. I wanted very badly to fly the camera over the woods looking for possible squatters, or worse. So our first priority after setting up camp was to go walk next to the forest and get the camera up in the air, investigating what was down beneath the trees in all directions. After a while, when we couldn't see anything down there that didn't look natural, I relaxed and we both started joking around that we were searching for Bigfoot. Then Hayes gasped. "Did you see that?" she asked, sounding frightened. I couldn't tell if she was joking, so I didn't say anything. She told me to watch the monitor. She was going to try to make the drone fly down to where she had seen it earlier. This time we both saw it. It was a second or maybe less that I saw it because we both were surprised by it and gasped. But my gasp surprised Hayes so that she dropped the remote control, and that surprised me so that I fell backwards and almost hurt myself. But what we both saw, it looked like a hairy man jumping in between trees. I grabbed the remote and put it in my backpack, getting ready to get back to camp. We brought the drone back in and put in the other battery because we were going to send it right back out to look again. We never did though, because we got lost looking at the videotape of the flight we had just made. Hayes could not find the part that had made her gasp the first time, and neither of us could find the part that surprised us both so much the second time. I don't mean that it came out blurry or all we got was a blob squatch. I mean, we saw nothing on that video that resembled a hairy man jumping between trees. According to that recording, such a thing had not occurred. We watched the tape over and over, and soon it was starting to get dark. I really felt like we should go sleep inside since there was a mansion waiting for us just a 5-minute walk up the hill. Hayes, however, wanted to get the full camping experience, so I built a fire for us as she watched, and I made us hot dogs and beans while she picked at it. She suggested we tell spooky stories, but I was genuinely afraid to be there right then, and I was certain I would not find them entertaining. We were both actually pretty tired from the day, so we crashed not too long after sundown. I'm not sure when it started since I didn't get up and check the time on my phone until the third or fourth time it woke me up. But something was poking our tent. Or hitting it, you know? Just like one poke, then nothing for a long time, then a poke maybe a few minutes later, maybe a half hour later. I don't really know. At one point, I dreamed that pine cones were falling out of a tree and hitting into our tent. That's sort of what it felt like. We weren't close enough to the woods for that to happen. We were in the middle of a field. Then it felt like the whole pine tree fell on us. Hayes woke up with a start along with me, both of us asking the other what that was. This time I could hear running. Someone was running away. Now someone else was running up from a different direction, and wham! They punched our tent before running away. "What kind of hillbillies have you got living in your family's forest?" I asked Hayes, who just sat there stunned. "Well, aren't you going to do something about it?" I asked. When she continued to sit there stunned, I took that as a no. "Fine," I informed her. "Then I'll deal with it." I stuck my head out of the tent, intent on shouting these boys down, whoever they were. My peripheral vision caught sight of several figures in the darkness. When I focused in on them, however, they did not look like boys, and they did not look like men. They looked like werewolves. They looked gray in the moonlight, but I'm not sure what color they might have been in daylight. 2 of them stood on their hind legs, and the third was either crouched on all fours, mostly obscured from view by foliage and underbrush. I could hear more behind me, on the other side of the tent, so there had to have been at least 4 of them in total, maybe more. I'll be honest, they looked as surprised as I must have looked. I'm not sure what they thought was inside our tent, but apparently I wasn't any more what they were expecting than they were what I was. It was a split-second moment in time that seemed to exist as a reality unto itself. I still go back to the planet where that moment is taking place when I go to sleep at nights. That one moment in time when curiosity overruled any other consideration both for me and for these, whatever they were. But everything eventually comes to an end, and I soon pulled my head back into the tent. Hayes asked me who was out there. I remember not being able to form words. When she made a move to poke her own head out, I physically restrained her. She got past me and looked out anyway. I heard growling from outside. Apparently the dog monsters had moved past their curious stage. Falling backward into the tent, Hayes explained quietly, "They're coming. All of them." "The drone," I said to nobody in particular. Where was my backpack? Here it was, and there was the remote control. Did we put the new battery in? I asked that same nobody. I got my answer as I heard the buzzing of the drone starting up outside. It started, I squealed. Great, said an annoyed Hayes sarcastically. Are you going to, helicopter them to death? Doesn't it have a spotlight on it? I asked. I was convinced I had seen a light on the front of it earlier. There, a button labeled light. I stuck my head back out of the tent. The werewolves, or whatever they were, seemed to be holding their ground, unsure about whatever was making the buzzing noise. I turned on the light, which was stupid because it temporarily blinded me. I had the drone lift up, turned it around in the air, and aimed its spotlight as well as I could toward the monsters. Before the light could reach any of them, they had all retreated to the darkness of the trees. Let's go, I said. Now. I pulled Hayes out of the tent and we both took off running like crazy people back to the mansion. About halfway there, I dropped the remote control and remembered about the drone. Picking up the remote, I looked behind and saw that it had flown out over the trees and was now further away than the wolf-headed creatures. And without that between us and them, the dogmen had come back out of the forest and were now headed back in our direction. Oh, no, I said as I piloted the drone back, hoping it would scare them as much as it had the first time. It was taking so long. I looked and saw that the creatures had fallen to all fours, and then they began to run. Just then I saw every moment of my life in order, including my birth and moments before I could speak. I accepted that it had been a good life and made preparations to leave this mortal realm. Then Hayes came from behind me and to my left, screaming like a crazy person. I forget what she said, but she was pretty angry and indignant. She wasn't screaming at me, she was screaming at the dogmen. And she wasn't just screaming at the dogmen, she was running toward them. I wondered to myself, what would she do if she caught up to them? I would have to run after her to stop her, but I felt like I was going to faint, and it was taking all my energy just to focus on getting the drone back. So my best friend Hayes went yelling and screaming toward at least 3 giant-sized hairy men with prehistoric-looking monster dog heads, threatening them with all the things she was going to do to them. This girl, who to this day is not 5'4", and who I think was still shorter back then, this little young woman goes running toward these monsters that looked taller than her, even when they were on all fours. And it worked. They backed off. Realizing this and seeing the drone heading straight for her, Hayes doubled back and we went inside the mansion using one of the back entrances. We picked a room in the front of the house to sleep in, up on the 2nd floor, and that was the end of the dogmen. We never saw them ever again. Instead, we were kept up by the ghosts in the attic of that house. But that's an entirely different story, and my fingers are hurting from typing so much on this device. From my experience, the dogmen seemed both paranormal in a sense, like we were unable to record them on video, but very real in another sense, like how they ran from the drone spotlight. I have little doubt they could hunt humans as prey successfully, and I count my blessings that I survived the encounter. And even though they may be extra-dimensional or supernatural, they do have their weaknesses and limitations. For one thing, they're easily spooked. Boo!
The Halloween of Dogman, as told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. Recently heard a radio podcast in which someone implied that Dogman was a hoax created in the 1980s, which had been inspired by the movie American Werewolf in London. I know this isn't the case because I and my whole family fell under attack from a dogman before that movie came out, way back in the late 1970s. This all happened when I was 12. And my parents had just bought their first house. My 2 younger sisters and I used to call it the last house, though, because it was the last house on the last corner of the last block on the last street in town before you hit the forest. Although my family seemed to regard it as a vast improvement over our apartment, I kind of resented how much longer it took me to get to school or get home. I resented how far away we now were from everything and everyone. But I mostly resented the neighborhood curfew for everyone under 18. You had to be in before sundown, so the law literally changed daily. They would print that day's sundown time in the comic section of our local newspaper to make sure the kids all knew when to be inside. If you don't know what comics or newspapers were, just ask your great-great-grandparents. I was furious that I was supposed to still live like this, being inside before the first rays of darkness, onward, years into the future, still living like this when I was 15, 16, 17. No matter how overcrowded our apartment had been, at least it hadn't been a prison. I remember one of the kids at school warning me about this town. He was my age, but he spoke like a man of experience. Trick-or-treaters get done early around here, he told me cryptically. Speaking of which, it was October, and my mother had gotten one of the neighbor mothers to invite me and my sisters to join their Halloween trick-or-treating adventures. That was a good deal for us, as we had just moved in weeks earlier and wouldn't have even known which doors to knock on. I remember I went as Darth Vader that year. Back then, Halloween costumes for kids were really idiotic. For instance, if you were going as Darth Vader, it didn't mean you dressed like Darth Vader and wore a Vader helmet. It meant you wore these flame-retardant pajamas that said Star Wars on the front with a drawing of Darth Vader. Then you had a plastic mask of the Vader helmet that only covered the front of your head, which was held on with a rubber band that painfully pulled some of your hair out each time you moved the mask around. Also, rather than have cool Darth Vader shades to look out of, this stupid mask had the eyes completely cut out for safety reasons. Now, everyone would know it was me. I begged my mom to let me wear Dad's aviator sunglasses under the mask to protect my secret identity, but she never really got the point of anything I ever talked about. Safety first was her cry, and that of all mothers in the country. Back in 1978, mothers ruled, which was why TV was so terrible and Halloween had become safe. And I learned from personal experience that for all their taking the fun out of everything, we still weren't really very safe. Not at all. Because of the sundown curfew rule, all trick-or-treating had to be done by something like 5:45 that year, or 10 before 6. How stupid is that? But still, for kids, some trick-or-treating is better than no trick-or-treating, so we went with it, then went home to start separating our haul and trading candy with each other. My father used to call it the sugar stock market. "It must be Halloween," he would say, "because I can hear that the sugar stock market is back in session." Chocolate was always most valuable, with candy corn the least. It had been a Halloween tradition in our family to do what we called a seance, but it was actually just us playing with the Ouija board. You can lecture me all you want about how Ouija boards are this and Ouija boards are that, but my family back in 1978 isn't going to hear you talking. The fact is, Ouija boards were very mainstream and middle America back then. And we all thought of it as a game. We kept it in the top of one of our closets with the Monopoly, Sorry, and Stratomatic baseball. So we would all gather and use the Ouija board to ask if any of our dead relatives had any advice for us in the new year. I don't know how this tradition got started, since neither of my parents regarded themselves as witches, and I don't think we'd heard of Wicca yet, so maybe they got the idea from an old movie or something. All I know is, each Halloween, we'd get to stay up to midnight, even if it were a school night. And we'd get to try to talk to our dead relatives. And none of the three of us thought this was weird. In fact, we all loved Halloween that much more because of it. We got to watch a brand new TV movie called Devil Dog, Hound from Hell that we loved. I haven't seen it since, but I remember back then thinking it was cinematic genius. Someday, when you're old, I informed my sisters sagely, you'll be able to say that you saw Devil Dog Hound from Hell on its opening night. So that year, Dad wanted to have the ceremony in the woods, and Mom said no because it would violate curfew. This infuriated Dad and led to a big argument. What's the point, he wanted to know, of living across the street from the woods if I can't bring my kids in there at midnight and talk to dead people on Halloween? His face was red, and I remember there was a scary bulging vein on his head like that alien from the Star Trek episode. Anyway, one of my sisters mentioned that we could just do it on the back porch, which had a view of the woods. This seemed to calm both sides, and Mom agreed that as long as we stayed on the porch, and both our parents were there the entire time, we probably wouldn't be breaking any local ordinances. We all celebrated, then brought 3 big bowls of candy out with us to the porch so we could get this paranormal show on the road. My sisters had wanted to ask about our dog Benji that had gotten run over. My parents lied to both my sisters that Benji had gotten a job in Hollywood as a stunt double for the real Benji. Obviously, they didn't believe it because this Halloween, their number one topic was the concern that Benji was doing okay in doggy heaven. Neither of my parents were into that subject, and they made it clear. Still, there were 5 of us putting our fingers on the planchette, and 3 of us were asking questions about Benji Dog. None of our questions were getting answers, and my younger sister was getting kind of cranky. Dad insisted we ask other questions when my sister said the problem was that we were asking in human language instead of dog language, so she began barking. Then my other sister and I joined in. Mom told us to be quiet, but we missed our dog friend, and we wouldn't get to ask again till next Halloween, so one of us, I think it was me, started howling. Then there were 3 of us, howling. And then, something. I don't know what, but something howled back. My sisters and I stared at each other in amazement. "Benji!" they both gasped out. "It's not Benji," grouched my father as we heard a second howl, then a third and a fourth. "You've just woken up every dog in the neighborhood with your stupid howling." My mother argued quietly but firmly that it was time to go inside, but my father hadn't gotten to ask any of his questions yet, and he was a cranky man until he got to ask the Ouija board his questions. My mother could see how important it was to him, so then he started asking about stuff which was over my head at the time, and which I never committed to memory. It was like he droned on and on and on, and that's not fair to do to a kid who is up way past his bedtime. My littlest sister snored so loud that she woke herself up and squeaked out a mini scream. This had all of us, except my father, laughing. "Can't you forever be serious?" he uttered as he stared upward in pain. "We're trying to communicate with the beyond." My mom suggested she put us to bed and then the 2 of them could resume in greater seriousness, but we didn't want to go to bed and we all began protesting and insisting on how not tired we were. Both my parents tried to quiet us down when suddenly a noise came from across the street in the woods that silenced not only us, but the entire forest. "What was that?" we all asked our parents. Then I noticed they were asking the same question to each other. My mother said we all had to get inside at once. My father disagreed. He turned to me. "Hey, Slugger, why don't you go down there and see what's making all that noise in the woods?" My mother said she absolutely forbade me going into the forest and how that sounded like a very large dog. And besides, it would be a violation of the curfew law. My father countered, saying it would be safe for me to go if I brought my 2 sisters with me. What kind of animal could harm all 3 of them, he asked my mother. She never agreed, but it was 1978, so he overruled her, and off we went into the darkness to see what had made that terrifying animal noise just moments earlier. My mother kept calling to us to stay in her line of vision, and my father kept yelling at her to focus on the planchette. You can say what you want about my parents' child-rearing skills or their mental acuity, but you'd be judging them by 21st century standards. Considering how much their generation drank, I think they all did a surprisingly good job. So, there we were, 2 girls and a boy, me the oldest at age 12, walking toward the last known location of a giant hairy monster making threatening noises, and all because our father wanted us to get out of his hair so he could play a board game outside at midnight. But I'm telling you, we were a pretty average family for that time. Now, I was a huge Bigfoot fanatic, which back then meant having seen both The Legend of Boggy Creek and the episode of In Search of about Bigfoot. There wasn't all that much more to see back then on the subject for most 12-year-olds. And one of my main complaints about the Patterson-Gimlin film was that he hadn't kept running after the monster to get a close-up shot. I mean, it's a dumb thing to say, but I was a kid. I didn't really get the concept that if that thing in the film was real, it was big enough to seriously hurt any paparazzi that got too close. It's the job of a kid to know everything, and I did my job extremely well. I swore that if I ever got a chance to see a monster, I'd want to get up close and personal, the ABC way. For these and other reasons, lack of sleep probably included, I fearlessly led my sisters out to the edge of the lawn, directly across the street from the forest. None of us had any sense that we were in danger. We were just excited to be walking around outside after curfew, as though we were free people. We were singing some Bee Gees disco song, and my sisters were dancing, or more properly, they were theatrically making fun of dancers we'd seen on Soul Train on TV. Then, I thought I heard something. I hushed them, and we all listened. Something was growling. Something across the street from us was growling. Whispering, my younger sister said, "Devil doggy." Then she jumped up and down. I couldn't see it. I could hear the dog, but I couldn't see it. I was starting to get nervous. "I can't see it," I whispered. My older, younger sister said, "I can." Where is it?" I needed to know. "It's the devil dog. It's right in front of you," came her answer. I looked in front of me, but I already had been looking in front of me. There was no dog that I could see in those woods or in those bushes, unless it was crouched down very low. "Look for the eye shine," she told me. I had no idea what she was talking about. I could see no eye shine in front of me. "It's yellow," she said, sounding almost in a trance. That's when my younger sister saw it. She gasped. "Ooh, devil dog, he's up in a tree," she exclaimed. I looked up, and then I saw the eye shine. Its eyes were yellow, and they were up in the branches of one of the trees directly in front of me, right across this 2-lane blacktop. But the dog wasn't in the trees as my sister had thought. It was just so tall that its head was up near the branches. My eyes adjusted to the light, and I could see the silhouette of the thing. It did have a dog's head, yes, and it did have dog's eyes. It did growl like a dog, and it did seem feral like a wild animal. But this particular animal was not down on all fours. This particular animal held 2 trees apart with its arms as it stood on its hind legs. It took one step out from behind the trees, and we could see it in its entirety. My littlest sister squealed, "Devil doggy!" and ran toward it. That didn't last long. The giant beast bent down and basically roared in her face. She turned around faster than anything I'd ever seen and went tearing back to the house with a kind of expression so comically frightened that I'd only seen it on cartoon characters before. All 3 of us kids were screaming at the top of our lungs and running full speed back into the house. I turned around and saw the Dogman was following us. By the way, we actually called it a Dogman at the time, my sisters and myself. To us, werewolf meant Lon Chaney Jr. It didn't mean a man with a dog head. We'd never seen werewolves like those that appear in more recent films back then in the land of 1978. Anyway, back to the story. We tore inside, past my parents, and went straight to our beds, pulling our covers up over our heads. Our parents were involved in some kind of ruckus outside, and for a while my sisters were afraid they were getting eaten by the Dogman. She wept under her covers. I could hear her from my room. I shouted to her that Mom and Dad were fine, but I wasn't sure I believed it myself. When Mom finally came upstairs to tuck us in, it was quite a relief. We all asked her what happened and if the Dogman had attacked her. She didn't know what we were talking about. Apparently neither of them had seen the Dogman at all. We found this hard to believe, but she seemed to find our story even harder to believe. She said the ruckus was caused by one of our neighbors coming over, saying he had heard them beating us and making us scream. I felt bad that our screaming had gotten Mom and Dad in trouble with the neighbors, but only for a few seconds. Then it seemed kind of funny, and I couldn't help but laugh. I knew the neighbor she was talking about, and he was a jerk, always looking for a fight. So really, it was kind of funny that we woke him up. I suddenly remembered that we had left all our candy out on the back porch, so I said I was going to go downstairs and bring it in. Then my sisters reminded me of the Dogman, and I wasn't so sure I wanted to go get it after all. "You've had enough candy for tonight," said Mom. "I'll bring your candy in for you. Now you kids get to bed." The next morning, we were groggily eating breakfast and getting ready for school when I remembered the candy. "Hey, Mom, where'd you stash my candy?" I asked. She looked confused for a second, then remembered. "Oh, when I went out to the porch last night, all the bowls were empty." "Empty," we all bellowed. "They were half filled when we went off to check the woods." My father got defensive. "Are you trying to say your mother and I ate all your candy?" he demanded to know. "Although there would be nothing wrong with it if we did, since we pay for everything around here, don't we?" He would always ask that over and over until you had to idiotically agree with him that he paid the bills, as though that weren't his legal responsibility, and instead just some random favor he bestowed upon us. Anyway, I never thought that my parents ate my candy. They had bad taste. They ate garbage food like spinach and vegetables. I had a different theory about who ate those 3 bowls of candy the previous night. In my theory, Dogman has a sweet tooth.
I adopted a Dogman puppy. As told to Peter Bernard, read by Madeline Starr. When I was a little girl, I lived in the country and used to play in the fields and forests behind my daddy's farm. One day, this funny little dark brown puppy with tall pointy ears comes wandering out of the bushes, walking on its hind legs like a little man. It was really the cutest thing. I threw a ball and he would go on all fours running to get it, then pick it up in his mouth and walk back to me on his hind legs to return it. I thought he was the most amazing little puppy in history, and I immediately fell in love with him. He was incredibly smart, and I started envisioning the two of us appearing on stage together, or maybe on television. Walking home, he tagged along like a little boy, only occasionally going on all fours to smell a bug or chase a bird. When I got back, my mom was very impressed that I had already taught this stray puppy how to do a trick walk, but I told her the puppy came with the trick already installed. This caught Daddy's interest, and he came over to have a closer look at my new pet. "That isn't a puppy," he said. Mother and I laughed, then we saw he wasn't joking. "That's a monster," said my daddy as he raised his rifle and took aim. Mom and I screamed, and the puppy got spooked and ran off into the forest. Daddy fired a warning shot over his head to keep him running. Then he turned to me, his eyes angrier than I'd ever seen them. "Don't go playing with stray animals," he shouted. "You already know not to play with stray animals." I thought about explaining, but he stormed into the house before I could. Mom scooted after him, asking him why he had just done what he did. Crying, I ran into the woods to my rock that I would sit on when I felt sad. I just sat there and cried. This was my only private spot that Daddy hadn't found out about yet, so I would go there when I really needed space. I don't know how long I was there. It felt like forever because I was so sad at that moment. Suddenly, though, my little friend came trotting out of the bushes on his hind legs, tongue hanging out, a big smile on his face, and his tail going crazy, wagging extra hard. He jumped into my lap, and I hugged him so hard. It wasn't like we had only met that day. My friendship with this puppy was already a very deep and thorough one. Why would my father want to break up a girl and her puppy? I had never been so hurt by him, or felt so angry. Then I heard Mom calling me home for dinner, and my heart raced. If I left this puppy now, I might never see it again. I remembered the second barn. Well, we called it the second barn, but it was actually our first barn. It was there when my parents bought the place. Daddy didn't like the location of it, though, so he built a new one where he needed it, and just left the old one. It was still structurally sound, so he and Mom had hemmed and hawed about whether to convert it to something new or tear it down. They had argued about it since before I was born, from the way I understood it at the time. Neither of them ever seemed to go out to it, and I could see it from my bedroom window. My parents slept all the way on the other side of the house, and their windows faced in the other direction. I suddenly realized the second barn was the perfect hiding spot for my new little friend. I picked him up in my arms, and he climbed up my shoulder, licking my cheek. I giggled and ran as fast as I could to the second barn. Arriving late for dinner that night, I had to deal with both Mom and Daddy lecturing me about this and that. I probably got lectured to about the puppy as well. I can't remember. I know I just blotted out everything they were saying, thinking about how I was going to sneak food to the dog and what kinds of food I could get to him without being discovered. The next day was the most fun day of my entire childhood. I had a new best friend. In many ways, this puppy was like another human kid to play with. We could play catch, we could play hide and seek, we could chase each other, and he was a much, much better Frisbee player than I was, that's for certain. When Mom called me to come home for dinner, I couldn't believe the entire day had passed so quickly. I wasn't hungry and didn't want to stop playing, so we just kept on chasing each other. I never laughed so hard, and I never had so much fun in my life. Then I heard someone in the forest, and I stopped. We both stopped everything and grew silent. I listened as hard as I could, then noticed my puppy friend was staring toward the patch of woods in the direction my daddy used to work in back then. He was about to discover us. I picked up the puppy and took off toward the barn. He knew where we were headed and jumped out of my arms to run ahead of me on all fours. He zipped inside and went up to his sleeping area. I followed up the ladder and kissed him goodnight. I told him to be a good boy and stay quiet. Then I'd play with him again tomorrow. It felt like he could understand what I meant, even if he didn't understand English. I ran back home, looking in all directions, trying to make certain I didn't run into my father by accident. That night at dinner, Daddy wasn't as angry as the night before. In fact, he seemed almost apologetic. Now, my father never apologized for anything in his life. He saw that as a sign of weakness. So apologetic is too strong a word. But he did seem to have regrets and something to get off his chest. "Don't you have something to say, Henry?" my mother asked into the utter lack of conversation. He wasn't going to say he was sorry. Even at that young age, I knew he was never going to apologize to me for anything. Also, I knew he wasn't going to change his mind and let me have the puppy, because Daddy viewed changing his mind or softening his position to be signs of weakness as well. So, what was he going to say? I had never seen him looking so conflicted before. I had never seen him looking unsure about what to say or do before. That was the first time in my life I didn't see him as Daddy. I saw him as another person like you or me. I was genuinely wondering what could possibly be about to come out of his mouth. I had a few different guesses, but none of them were even close. I'll try to remember what he said, but this is from so long ago, I'm sure I'll be paraphrasing in places. Basically, he gave a speech that started something like this. "Little girl," he began. "It's hard for your daddy to accept it, but you're old enough now that your mother and I think it's time for you to start learning about some grown-up type things." Oh no. Was this that speech? I was kind of hoping I'd get that speech from Mom, not Dad. But then my father took the king of all left turns and careened right off the highway of normal dinner conversation. "There are monsters, little girl. There are monsters in the woods. There are monsters in the woods." Okay, Daddy had lost his mind. I looked to Mom, but she seemed to know he was going to say that. "Don't look at me," she said. "Look at your father when he's speaking to you." So they both had gone crazy. I wondered, do other kids have parents who give them a speech over dinner about how the woods are filled with monsters? I started doing the math in my head about how many more years it would be that I would be living under the roof of a paranoid couple. I felt like it was my responsibility to get them to see psychiatrists, but I knew my father would never talk to a shrink unless he had been fully committed and had no choice. There wasn't much I, as a kid, could do in this situation except hope I could ride it out into adulthood. Suddenly, my childhood was over, and my parents, who had loved unconditionally up until then, seemed like the other to me. I had jumped from a trusting kid to a cynical teenager in a few seconds, entirely skipping over all of adolescence. I continued listening to Dad's speech, but now more from the point of view of someone gathering information about the enemy than from the point of view of a kid getting lectured by her father. "Honey," said Dad with a sad look on his face, "I'm asking you to please listen to me. I'm asking you just as I'd ask any grown-up, just as I'd ask a fellow who was my best friend in the world. And I'm asking you to please consider what I have to say and sleep on it before you say anything back. I'm asking you to consider what I'm saying not as something your father told you, but as something someone who really cares about you wants you to know, for your own sake." Yet another sharp left turn out of nowhere. Surprised by his candor, I nodded my head in agreement. I would listen to him like I would listen to any other person, and he would talk to me as though I were his equal. This was my first agreement with any adult that I had been asked to agree to, instead of having it thrust upon me. Obviously, my father had never behaved this way before, and he had succeeded in making me curious. I listened to the rest of what he had to say quietly and attentively. Satisfied that we were in agreement, he began again. "Now, I know it seems really mean and wrong to take a puppy away from someone, and in most cases it is. I know it must seem like there's something wrong with me because of the way I acted yesterday, and that's why I want to level with you and tell you a story of something that happened to me back when I wasn't much older than you. I was 15. I was thinking, 15 is a lot older than me. But I remembered I was having a grown-up conversation and decided to look serious and keep quiet. He continued, "Me and my buddy Horace, you don't know him because he moved clear on out of these parts after this story I'm about to tell you happened. In fact, he denies it to this day, but in my opinion, this story is the reason Horace moved out as soon as he was old enough to get a driver's license and a job." So there we were, two 15-year-old boys out hunting, and we caught sight of the biggest buck I had seen up to that point. and one of the biggest I've ever seen since. We both got overexcited and shot at once like amateurs. Nobody ever taught us about gun safety or how to hunt or anything. We were completely out of control and had no idea what a danger we were to ourselves and others. Trust me. So we didn't have any idea if we hit it before it ran off, and we headed over in the direction of where it had been to see what we could see. Sure enough, we found evidence that we had hit it, and we found a clear trail that we began to follow. The trail went deeper and deeper into a pretty thickly wooded area, with a lot of thorny underbrush that tears your skin and all kinds of bugs that drink your blood. We were going through there as quietly as we could manage, but we were still making a lot of noise. Every so often we'd stop to catch our breath and listen to hear if we could hear the buck. We never did, but then one time, we heard someone behind us. At first I thought it was another deer, and I was about to head back in that direction, but the sound of the walking wasn't like a four-legged animal. Horace said, "Someone else is following this deer trail." "Someone wants to steal our buck." That made sense to me. It was some scavenger hunter who heard our amateur-sounding shots and was hoping he could beat us to our own kill and get a free meal. I told Horace to cover me, and he raised his rifle at the bushes behind us. I pointed my gun down, but I was ready to fight if need be. I called out, "Hey you, are you friend or foe?" No answer. The sound of walking toward us continued uninterrupted. I shouted louder this time, thinking maybe he hadn't heard me the first time. "Hello, friend. You don't happen to be following our trail, do you? Because I think me and my buddy got that covered." Still no response. Still the walking continued. Whoever it was, they sounded very close now, right on the other side of these tall bushes and weeds. I knew that had to be a man with a lot of nerve, so I prepared myself for anything. Or so I thought. Because what came out of those bushes was not something any sane person would have ever thought to be prepared to see. Now, I know your mother and I have told you time and time again that there's no such thing as monsters when you get scared at bedtime. And that's true. There's no such thing as monsters under your bed, and there's no such thing as monsters in your closet. But honey, I'm not gonna lie to you. There are monsters in the forest. I know because on that day I saw one. It was 7 feet tall if it was an inch, and probably taller for all I know. It was as tall as a basketball player, but as wide as a football player. It was a man, but it had a dog's head. Not a civilized man, mind you, but a savage one. A hair-covered monster man with a dog head. And I tell you, me and my buddy were surprised to see that. But that thing, it was not surprised to see both of us. It looked like we were exactly what it was expecting to see. We knew we were outmatched. Horace pointed his gun at the ground, and we both avoided looking it in the eye, turning our heads a bit to the ground. I've learned later that this is a good thing to do with a predator, but honestly, it was pure nature that took over us and told us what to do. Horace told me later he never considered shooting it. He figured it would only make it mad. I never considered running because I could tell there's no way I could ever outrun this thing, not on grass and especially not through these thick woods. No, we both knew we were at the mercy of this monster, and the best thing to do was show it we weren't a threat without seeming too much like prey. So we just kind of backed off slowly, and the giant dog thing just walked on by, following the trail to our deer. And we let it. Boy, did we let it go on after that deer. And after it had traveled out of our sight, we quietly got our behinds back the way we came and fell to our knees saying prayers of thanks when we made it back to my parents' farm. Now, I think you know where this story is leading. It's leading back to your so-called puppy. That wasn't no puppy. That was a monster. Do you hear what I'm saying to you? I nodded. I understood. But still, I had no intention of giving up my puppy. I decided he didn't need to know that part. So now I can't remember if this next stuff happened that night or the night after, but it was sometime very soon after my father's monster lecture that I was awakened at night by a crashing noise outside my window. It was a crashing and a banging, really loud. I got up and looked out, but at first I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. Then I saw the barn door swing open fast, faster than I'd ever seen it open before. It made me gasp because I couldn't imagine what could be strong enough to throw those heavy doors open like that. Then I saw it. It was exactly as my daddy had described. Well, except this one was a female. I could see even from that distance. It was walking away toward the forest, and walking with it was my puppy. I ran down the stairs and I could hear my father already stirring on the other side of the house. I had to beat him to the barn and remove all evidence that I had been feeding the puppy out there. I never once thought that this might be a dangerous situation to be running into. At that moment, I was more afraid of my father than my puppy's mother. I reached the barn and looked back. I could see Daddy running around from the front of the house, heading in my direction. I didn't think he saw me. I rushed into the barn and looked around for food scraps or water. I didn't see any. I did notice a huge hole in the wall on the side facing the forest. Maybe they had taken the food with them. Then I heard a dog. A large dog. It sounded angry and it sounded like it was up in the loft. I looked up there and saw that the source of the dog noise was not in the loft. It was standing in front of the ladder leading up there. It was so tall, though, that its head was up as high as the loft, and that was the source of my confusion. It was the mate of that female I had just seen. It was the father of my puppy. It bent down, moving its terrifying jaws and huge teeth closer and closer to me. "Get down!" someone screamed. I got down. Then there was a series of loud explosions of gunfire. And there was animal screaming, and there was foul language from my father, and there was a monster loudly exiting through the previously created hole in the barn wall. Daddy picked me up and carried me off, and that's about all I can still remember about the incident. Daddy had the second barn torn down, and he installed a motion tracking security system around the edges of our property. He lived out the rest of his days on that farm and never saw the dog people again. My mother still lives there, and she tells me she still has never heard of anyone in the area ever seeing them ever again. I wonder about my puppy friend. He'd be an adult now. He might have offspring of his own. I wonder if I will ever meet him again. These days, I'm an avid camper. I love deep woods camping, and I love to go alone or with one camping partner. I have no fear at all of the forest. I know that if anything bad happens to me, I'll be safe. After all, one of my best childhood friends is a dogman.
Dogman lifted my 300-pound barbell, as told to Peter Bernard, read by P.Q. Ribber. Hey, P.Q. Ribber and Scary Stories. I hope you get to read this one before Halloween because it's the true story of how me and some of my buddies saw an actual dogman back in the early 80s. And although I titled this email, Dogman Lifted My 300-Pound Barbell, he actually did more than lift it. He destroyed a lot of my friends' uncles. Well, let me explain the situation first, then I'll get back to exactly what we saw this steroid freak-looking Dogman do. I heard your story of how you know that Dogman wasn't a hoax from the later 80s because you saw it as a kid in the late 70s. Well, that made me want to tell my story, which happened a bit after that in the early 80s, right after I had graduated school. My two best friends from college and I borrowed money from our parents and opened the most surefire, long-term kind of a business, a record store. If you're too young to know what a record store was, it was a place where people went to pay money for physical artifacts that contained scratchy versions of audio information you've all stolen electric copies of for free. People used to have a lot more respect for music when you used to have to pay to hear scratchy versions of it. And people used to even respect the guys that sold it. 2 of us had groupies from the gig. The third of us was too smelly. Let's call him Henny for this story. Lenny, Stenny, and Henny. That was us. Basically, I'm Lenny. Stenny was a record nerd like us, but he was into weightlifting, and obviously he got the most girlfriends. I was your standard, skinny, record geek with long, straight hair, and as I said before, Henny was disinterested in personal hygiene. He was, what's the PC term for it, differently weighted? How do you politely say in the 21st century that someone was an immensely overweight dude? Henny was a guy in his own world, usually with one hand holding a comic book and the other hand shoving food in his mouth. He worshipped our muscular friend Stenny, whereas I got along with Stenny because we were intellectual equals with mutual respect. Anyway, we thought this would be the rest of our lives, selling stuff at a profit and having our pick of the cutest local women. These days, Stenny works part-time at Walmart and is on welfare to cover the rest of his bills, while I work in a really uptight office where my wife is one of my bosses. Henny passed away in the early 2000s, supposedly of natural causes, but I think he was trying to diet too fast and it weakened his system. But none of that matters, because in 1983, we were local gods, and in our minds, we always would be. The Evil Dead had come out on video, and we were selling it on VHS, I think, or Betamax, in the store. We had a small collection of movies we thought were cool on sale, like obscure horror or the few rock video things that were out by that time, but we loved The Evil Dead, and we ran it over and over in the store. Then one day, Stenny mentioned to us that the cabin in the movie looked just like his uncle's cabin upstate. We were like, no way! And after talking about it, we decided that it would be the most awesome place to celebrate Halloween that year. Stenny got the keys from his uncle, and we planned to shut the store down for a whole week, spending 7 days up there in the woods telling each other scary stories. Like, do you know the story of how Frankenstein was written? Mary Shelley, Percy Shelley, Lord Byron all trapped in a mansion during a fierce storm. They had no TV or internet, so they told each other ghost stories and challenged each other to write the scariest story they could. Mary won the competition because her story wound up being Frankenstein. In 1983, we weren't beaten down middle-aged men yet. We were poets and timeless artists, so we decided we'd spend a week telling scary stories. Then, on the last day, on Halloween Day, we'd have to read a story we wrote ourselves and try to top each other. I'm going to write the great American scary story, I informed the others, who insisted they were going to write the greater and greatest American scary stories. Nothing like competition to motivate would-be artists. Don't worry, I'm getting back to Dogman. None of the Dogman parts will make sense if I don't explain all this first. So we packed this very latest technology, a boombox with a cassette player. We also packed a VHS player and a box of horror movies, but we never used them, as I'll explain in a moment. So there we were, late October 1983, standing in the middle of the woods in front of this cabin that actually did look a lot like the cabin in The Evil Dead. And once we were actually there, I think Henny and I realized that being in the middle of the woods at a creepy-looking cabin is a far more intense experience than watching a movie about a creepy-looking cabin. Both of us openly expressed second thoughts and said we should turn around and head back home. Once we got inside, we felt even more strongly so. It was barely furnished, and as for sleeping arrangements, there was one bed and there were 2 hammocks. hammocks, strung between 3 poles that seemed to hold up the roof, at least for now. Not only that, but it was dirty inside there, like dusty. It was so dusty that when Henny and I caught sight of 2 brooms, we actually eagerly did physical labor, opening all the windows and the front doors and sweeping as much of the dust as we could outside as quickly as possible. There was running hot and cold water, so we were able to wash up afterward. But there was no refrigerator, and we discovered that the only way to get the electricity going was to run the very loud gas motor just outside the back window. We found the gas for it in the shed. It didn't look like it would provide more than maybe 10 hours of electricity. That meant no video. Wasn't any TV anyway, so it was just out. We decided to only run the generator to recharge our batteries and to just make do in the dark. After all, we were up there to scare each other, right? Okay, so this next part is where Dogman first comes into it, although we didn't realize it at the time. Stenny called us out to the porch and pointed out that his uncle's barbell was left out there. He challenged us to see how much we could lift. He taught us how to clean and jerk. I could lift only like 150 or 160, but Henny surprised us all by lifting 175 and beating me. There was a pile of weights on the side, so we kept adding one more and one more to see how much we could lift, then how much 2 of us could lift. So each time we dropped the barbell, it would slam into the wooden porch loudly, and I swear, every time it slammed down, we would hear a howling from the woods. Each time it happened, it seemed that the howling would either seem to come from a different direction, or maybe there were more than one of them howling at the same time. I mentioned it to the others, but they were having too much fun, didn't care. We maxed out at 300 pounds, I think, which took both Henny and Stenny to get up. When they slammed the weights down, that time the howling seemed to come from a whole lot closer. It didn't faze them, but now I was thoroughly spooked. I talked the other 2 into going back inside, and when we got back in, I shuddered all over. Something about that howling, how angry it had sounded, just utterly freaked me out. The sun was going down, and it was already dark inside this cabin with no electricity. I began arguing that we needed to get out of there right away. I pointed out that all we had to eat was beef jerky, trail mix, and whatever was in those ancient-looking cans in the pantry. I figured that argument would get Henny on my side at least, but Stenny wanted to stay, and Henny's worship of Stenny overruled even his hunger. Hen pointed out that he had also bought a box of Pop-Tarts, which were just as good untoasted, and the issue was settled. Stenny broke out his uncle's oil lamp so at least we could see well enough to read spooky stories to each other. I felt a bit queasy from the combination of fear, adrenaline, a sense of foreboding, spicy beef jerky, sweet Pop-Tarts, and warm grape soda. We listened to Vincent Price's Magic Witchcraft album on cassette. It's basically a lecture about the persecution of witches through the years, but with the light fading outside and the howling continuing unabated, even this record was too frightening for me. I took the tape out and popped in some kind of music, something loud and upbeat. Both my friends protested, but that was fine with me because a loud, heated discussion was a lot less creepy than sitting there listening to those wolves or coyotes or whatever they were circling us. Both guys decided I was ruining the mood, so they decided to crash out. Henny got the bed because, well, figure it out for yourself. Stenny and I took hammocks. Even though he had the best sleeping accommodations, Henny was jealous anyways. He started complaining that I wanted to sleep close to Stenny because I worshipped him instead of having an intellectual relationship with him the way he did. Can you imagine? Wow, did that guy have things backwards. The argument distracted me from the fact that I was terrified, and soon we all drifted off to sleep. I don't know how long we were out, but I know we all woke up simultaneously as there was a sound outside so loud at first, I thought it was an explosion. All three of us got up and ran to the front windows of the cabin, where we saw that the shed was entirely wrecked. And there was a man standing there, staring away from us toward the shack, breathing really heavily, like he had just exerted himself. I wasn't sure how and I wasn't sure what, but the guy had somehow thrown something into the shack and utterly destroyed it. The dude was barely illuminated by the moonlight, but I could see he was incredibly tall. "Did you leave the gas in the shack?" I asked. But the answer came from outside, as now there actually was an explosion. And the remains of the shack burst into flames, shooting up high into the sky. Standing between us and the fire, we could now see the man more clearly. He was hairy, or he was wearing fur all over his body at least. Then he turned around, and we could see he wasn't a man at all. He was a dog, but he was a dog that stood on his hind legs. He had to be some kind of prehistoric dog, though, because even on all fours, he would probably have been 5 feet tall. This was no greyhound. This was no thin-legged, graceful canine. This dog man was ripped. It had thick legs. It had muscular arms. It looked like a bodybuilder. It was far more ripped than our friend Stenny, and when this giant, hairy, muscle-bound, bipedal monster dog turned his head to look through the windows at us, all three of us shrank down below the windows and hid from him. But not for long, as he charged the cabin, running straight for us. We scuttled like roaches into the shadows, each finding our own pathetic little hiding space. None of us would be safe if that creature came in here. Wham! The monster slammed the outside of the cabin with both hands. It stared in one of the windows, looking around in the darkness for us, and it screamed. It was like a bark and a scream at the same time. It had its hands or paws or claws on either side of the window while it looked in, and then in between savage screams it would slam the wall with both hands and make the entire building shudder. I realized if it ever hit the glass it was looking through, it would easily shatter, and the wolf could then enter and eat all of us. Tiring of his view inside, the giant, man-like dog moved over to the other front window and began beating on that wall and screaming. I heard my friends crying, and I know I started trying to remember every prayer I could from when I was a kid and used to go to Sunday school. I couldn't get any of them right, so I just started making up my own prayers. I had never been so frightened in my life. I had no backup plan here, and obviously neither did either of my friends. There was no back door to this place, and the only way out was blocked by an impossible monster that couldn't actually exist. It screamed at us with the flames of the shed leaping into the sky behind us. I felt like we had literally gone to hell, and this was some kind of demon sent to torment us. I saw it disappear from the front of the house and heard Henny exclaim, "It's gone!" before any of us could come out of our hiding spots. We all heard it beating the walls to the right of us, then behind us, then to the left of us, then there it was back at the front window looking angrier than before. It screamed! It screamed! The dog man screamed. Sometimes things happen in our lives that are too much for our minds to handle. Sometimes the mind decides that the best thing to do is just take a nap. Usually your body goes to sleep at the same time, but there are times like this particular time when you may be sitting there, fully awake, yet at the same time you may be entirely absent from the scene, mentally and emotionally. I think that's what happened to me, because after about an hour of being screamed at by a furiously angry, slobbering, foaming giant dog, I don't remember what happened next. I have entirely missing memories of what happened between them and when I suddenly noticed that it was morning. Birds were singing. Nobody was shouting or banging on the walls anymore. I looked out the front window and saw that the shed fire was out. "The fire is out," I said, not sure if anyone was awake to hear me. I had no idea where the other two were. I walked out the front door and went over to the remains of the shed. In the midst of the wreckage, I saw, burned a dark black, the barbell we had been playing with the day before. It still had all its weights on it. It was the barbell with the 300 pounds of weight on it. Why was it in the middle of the wrecked shed, and how had it gotten burned like that? "He threw it," said Stenny, as though reading my mind. I probably should have been surprised Stenny was there, since I didn't hear him walk up. My mind was still on the barbell, though. "He threw it?" I asked. "Monster," answered Stenny. "That's how he started the fire. He threw the barbell into the shack." I started laughing. The bipedal dog threw the 300-pound barbell about 40 feet into the shack. I laughed harder. I laughed so hard I cried. I noticed that my two buddies had tears in their eyes too, but they weren't laughing. We never even discussed it. We just packed up and left. We had planned to be there 6 days more, but there was no discussion, and we just left. None of us ever wrote the great American scary story, as we had each planned to do. We had a Halloween party in the store instead, where everyone got wasted. We met some new girls, and nobody talked about upright walking canine creatures, or werewolves, or dogmen, or whatever you want to call that thing we saw. I still don't understand why it screamed at us and banged on the walls, but never smashed the windows and came in and ate us. It's almost like it was challenging us to come out and fight it. Maybe it just wanted to intimidate us out of the area, but if so, why spend all night doing so? Didn't it need to eat? And didn't it need to hunt before it could eat? How could it do either if it spent all night screaming and barking at me and my friends and banging on the walls of our cabin? None of it makes any sense to me. I remember Stenny's opinion on why it acted that way was just that dogs have small brains. It was an idiot, he informed me, as though he were certain. That dog was a freaking idiot. Just because it was shaped like a man doesn't mean it could think like a man, he stated in a matter-of-fact fashion. But certainly, it could at least think like a dog. That was my counter-argument. Even a dog knows it has to eat. The dog wasted all night in anger, not ever eating anything or anyone. If Stenny was right, and this dog was an idiot, even idiots know they have to eat. I remember something that Henny said before he died. He had a very different theory. Evil is a real thing, Henny told me. It exists in people, it exists as people, and it exists as that dog man. That's how Henny felt about it. He didn't see that monster as a dog or a wolf or as a man. He saw it for what it probably actually was. He saw it as the embodiment of evil itself. The end. And now, your special bonus story never heard before.
Cycle of the Dogman, as told to Peter Bernard, read by Madeline Starr. These days, if you live in an urban metropolitan area, you see women riding bikes to and from work regularly. Often, they are dressed for the office while riding the bicycle. Well, I can tell you for a fact that this was once much more uncommon, because I was an early adapter to the trend and fought the early wars. In fact, if I hadn't been riding my bike that day while wearing a dress, I would never have had my encounter with Dogman. Everybody these days knows about bicycle skirt guards. You can buy them on Etsy or Amazon. They go over your back wheel so that your skirt doesn't get caught in the spokes. I had never heard of such a thing on the day I met that monster. I had been riding my bike to work for a year, but I would originally ride in my sweats and then change at the office. One day I was running late, so I just got dressed for work and rode my bike to the office. I think I was the first in our town to do such a thing, judging by the reactions I got. It made me stand out to my boss, and that led her to giving me 2 promotions long before I had expected them. Everything in my life had improved, and I was a bit blissed out at that point in time. I foolishly chose to wear a dress with a long, loose skirt. Since I had usually worn somewhat form-fitting outfits, this had never been an issue before, and I hadn't been thinking clearly, lost in rapture over my new responsibilities at work and increased paycheck. My path to work went around the edge of town nearest the forest. It's the path with the least car traffic. More real air, less car exhaust. Of course, my skirt caught in my back wheels in the part running through the bit of old-growth forest where the trees overhang the road. It's a bit dark in there, even in the daytime. At first, I couldn't even understand what was happening. The back wheel stopped turning suddenly, and it felt like someone was behind me, stopping the bike and pulling on my skirt. I screamed. But when I turned around, nobody was there. I sat there confused for a while, but when I tried to turn the wheel again, I finally saw what had happened. So now I had to figure out how to untangle myself from the back wheel, hopefully without permanently destroying my outfit, and then figure out how to get the rest of the way to work without it happening all over again. I regretted not studying tying knots as a kid like both my brother and sister had done. It was taking me a while, and I couldn't go anywhere until the bicycle and I were no longer joined at the hip, or knee, or whatever. Of course, that is when something started growling. I mean, why not, right? Something started growling at me from the woods. It sounded like a sick dog or something, or whatever those other things are called. Coyotes, I think. It sounded like whatever it is, it's really unhappy that I'm here. So I'm feeling panic, but I know that I can't speed up because I have to unravel myself, and this thing is wound around and through in ways that were literally boggling my mind at that moment. So I know something is telling me it's going to eat me, and I'm still focused on breathing slowly and deeply as I remove my clothing from my transportation. Then I hear it, coming out of the forest. I look up and it's the big bad wolf. I'm in a fairy tale, and it's the big bad wolf, and it's about to blow my house of cards down around me. I'm just a character in a story that parents will tell kids for generations. Was I real? Was my life ever real? Or was I just part of a story all along? This thing had the blackest fur I had ever seen on any creature. It was giant, taller than any man by far. It stood on its back legs, and it smelled badly. It growled like a big cat from Africa, then barked like a giant prehistoric dog. And you really do see your life flash in front of your eyes when you think you're about to die. I know this for a fact, thanks to Dogman. Just then, a trio of cyclists came from the direction I came from, and the big bad wolf yelped in fear and ran back the way he had come from. The wolf had seen them, but I don't think the people saw the Dogman. 2 of the cyclists kept riding, but the third stopped to help me with my untying knot issues, and he walked with me the rest of the way to my job. He's the one who first told me about skirt guards for bicycles, and he bought me my first one. We've been dating for a few months since then, so my hot streak seems to be continuing. Even when I got menaced by a monster in the woods, it turned out to be good luck. I figured before my good luck streak is over, I had to share what happened to me. And I hope hearing my Dogman story brings good luck to you. Check out the audio podcast version of Scary Stories NYC, now available on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and other popular podcatchers. Bigfoot Attacked My Tiny House. Scary Stories by Peter Bernard, Volume 1, now available on Amazon in paperback, Kindle, and audiobook versions. Narrated by PQ Ribber and me, Madeline Starr. Forward by TV's famous Timothy Green Beckley, better known as Mr. UFO.
And if there's anyone out there who can't get enough of PQ Ribber, search in your favorite search engine for PQ Ribber and you'll find plenty of podcasts, music, and weirdness. I'd like to take a moment to say that if you have a scary story you'd like to tell us here, you can write Peter at peterbernard.com, or you can call our new Scary Stories hotline number and leave it to us in the form of a voicemail message. It's easy to remember. 804-LESCARY. That's 804-LESCARY, or 804-537-2279.
Come back for more Scary Stories.